Noon. And welcome to the fourth Southeast Asia Multi-Stakeholder Forum. And in the afternoon session, we will now proceed with session 2 after a discussion or deliberation of the sub-regional and regional level of the COVID impact on the achievements. For this session, we will have Dr. Ricardo Messiano from the Environment and Development Division of ESCAP. He will be moderating this session. I give you the floor, Dr. Ricardo.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Ronnie, for the introduction, and very good afternoon to all of you connected. It is my pleasure to moderate this panel for a topic which is very dear to me, the voluntary national reviews. We're talking about the follow-up and review of the implementation of the 2030 agenda at the national level, which is the key level of review. I know that many of you these days are kind of your antenna up because there is so much going on in terms of also at the global level with a global workshop organized by DESA on the voluntary national reviews. And what we want to do today is reflect a little bit with you on how these voluntary national reviews are going on in the sub-region. We have a very good and interesting lineup of panelists for the session, representing governments that, as in the case of Brunei, Darussalam, have presented the first VNR this year at the High-Level Political Forum in New York, and countries that will be presenting and that hereafter engage with the preparation of the report for the presentation at the High-Level Political Forum in 2021. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my great friend and colleague, Caitlin Porter, who is a senior VNR consultant in the Environment and Development Division at ESCAP. Caitlin has different hats, but the reason why she's with us today is that she was the one behind the preparation of the voluntary national review of Timor-Leste. And she did a great job, and she's now somehow she moved to the other side. She's now working with ESCAP in supporting countries in the preparation of their voluntary national reviews. Caitlin will give us a presentation setting the stage, refreshing us a little bit on what it means to prepare a VNR, and specifically focusing on what does it mean to prepare a VNR for the second time, as many of the panelists with us today will be preparing and presenting a VNR for the second time or third time, as in the case of Indonesia. Caitlin, floor is yours. I know we discussed where you have about 10, 12 minutes. If we can keep it around the 10, would be great. Caitlin, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just checking that you can hear me okay. I also have a presentation, which I'm hoping that your team will put up on the screen. So while that's happening, I'll keep talking. So it's great to be here with you. And as Ricardo kindly said, if the speakers could put that onto full screen, great, thank you. I'm going to be talking today primarily about putting together a second voluntary national review. Now I can look at all the names here and I can see that many of you will be presenting your VNR next year at the HLPF. Some of you presented this year. And a lot of you are very busy right now developing terms of reference and getting planning for the HLPF next year in your VNR. And so now is the exact time to hold this meeting. And I'm going to talk to you today about some key tips and lessons to think about when putting together your second review. It's quite amazing that for many of you, you'll be doing your second review. Time has gone quickly. I remember the first time, as I mentioned, I was involved with the Timor-Leste VNR. And I know that many of you, when you first did your first review, you didn't know what to expect, and you were rushing for time. Stakeholder engagement was a big task. You didn't have as much data as you wanted. And it was a challenge to do your first review. But now we have a lot of lessons and an expertise on how that went and things that you would do differently. And I've spoken to a number of countries that presented this year on their second review and talked to other countries about their lessons. And so what I'd really like to do is to also give tips to new countries that are presenting their first review next year. So if we could have the next slide. What I'm going to cover today is look at how a second review is different to the first voluntary national review. What is different about it? And how can you really take stock of the lessons and progress of your first review to really improve your review the second time around? And importantly, how can you reflect on the institutions that you set up and the working groups or the bodies that you set up to really make the most of implementing Agenda 2030? And as a number of countries had challenges with stakeholder engagement and really want to do a much bigger job and a greater job next time around, I'm just going to highlight some of the challenges that many of you experienced the first time around, and also give you some key tips and look at some of those areas that really consumed a lot of time for the first review. UNESCAP has produced a new guidance tool with lots of tips and guidance and checklists that will be circulated very soon to all the countries. And hopefully that will be a really useful tool for you. So today's presentation talks about lots of those parts of the guidance tool. And there's also going to be an e-tutorial, so you can look online as well. So there are a lot of resources coming your way. So if I could have the next slide. So just before I kick off on the second review, let's just take one moment to remember what a voluntary national review is really aiming to achieve. And then that will really help us focus on what's most important now you're starting your second voluntary national review. Ultimately, what the voluntary national review process and the follow-up and review process is really about is about building momentum across all parts of society and across government and different age groups and different parts of the country for a national conversation and hopefully a debate about how to really accelerate progress on the SDGs, how to overcome those challenges. And in order to do that, we really need to know where we are and where we're heading. And so it's about really tracking that progress on the SDGs. But crucially, and this is for the next review, how to understand what is driving the setbacks and also what's driving the successes that you've achieved. And the last thing that a VNR is really about is identifying very specific actions and next steps and very key partnerships to accelerate that progress. So if we're looking at the progress, the actions and the conversation and debate, how can we drive that in your next review? Okay, let's have the next slide. So how is the second national review, voluntary national review, different to the first time? Isn't it just updating the data and then we have the second report? Well, ideally, what we'd like to see and what countries are telling us that they did this year was to really use the first voluntary review, national review, as a starting point. And we really want to see countries connect and directly link their two reports, so that the second national review is really building on the findings and the next steps. Concretely, what did you say you were going to do and what did we actually do in the report? And it'd be great to see much more in-depth analysis of the causes of some of the challenges that the countries are facing. Why are there some setbacks? Or why have there been successes? And ideally, this is what countries are telling us. They really want to engage more stakeholders in a much more comprehensive way throughout the entire process. So taking on the next slide, a second voluntary national review is really different in three ways. Ideally, it shouldn't be a standalone report. We'd like it to connect directly to the analysis of your first review, but also not just to present what is already in that review. Let's take a new approach and try not to just summarise the national government policies in the review, but really try to take the analysis to the next step. So there's some of the key things that the second review is looking to do. Next slide, please. So one of the key things now is that many of you are developing your terms of reference for consultants and you're doing your timeline and your planning. You've already started and you're moving ahead now for your second national review. But what I think is really important is that you take a minute to take stock of the first review. How did the process go for the first VNR? What progress has been made since that first review? and what were the implementation challenges. And I'll briefly just talk on 3 of these points. So let's go to the next slide. So in the guidance tool, which will be circulated shortly, there are lots of checklists to help get you thinking. And one of the checklists is looking at what would you do differently this time around. I've got 5 different sections here on this checklist, but in the guidance tool, there are a number more. So looking at the structure of your VNR team, how did that work? How were decisions made? How was the report approved? How did the VNR process align with national processes and national indicator and monitoring frameworks? What would you do differently this time around? What about the planning process? How was time management? Did you have sufficient budget to go out to the sub-districts or the provinces? Did you have enough budget to do what you wanted to do, also for the HLPF? And data collection, not just did you have enough data, but how was the relationship with the National Statistics Office? How was it when you're compiling the graphs in the report? Stakeholder engagement. There is a lot in the guidance tool on stakeholder engagement. Lots of lessons and tips on how to improve and solve challenges. But how do you make sure that you really were able to engage and be inclusive in the stakeholder engagement and manage expectations? And communication. Did you communicate well to key stakeholders so they were informed? And then drafting and finalising the report on time. These are some things for the process that it's good to take stock of now. And next slide, please. Here you are. It's very hard to see, I know, on the screen, but it was just a flag that there's a suggested planning tool, but really broken down into lots of stages in the guidance tool we'll be circulating. And what it shows, the key things just to highlight, is the importance of starting super early. So that's now. And I know a number of you started in August. So looking at some of the key phases of the VNR process, but making sure not to forget the post-VNR process. What will you do after the VNR? And not just to think about it when you return from New York. So that's sort of adding a different phase at the end there. And what we've tried to highlight is that there's a few phases, maybe for the second VNR, that it's important to think about now that maybe you didn't think about the first time. We have a phone on now. Yeah, the importance of developing a storyline and looking at the storyline of the key report. Really looking at the institutional mechanisms and taking stock of your first VNR. So there's some key things to look at now. But also you'll see there that I've put stakeholder engagement and communication as not as a distinct phase, but actually to integrate it throughout the whole VNR process. And there's lots of new things to different ways maybe you could engage stakeholders or communicate more clearly or in different ways from right now right up until the HLPF and beyond. So there's lots of good guidance there on the process. So moving beyond process now to progress, and the next slide, please. Just 3 things when you're looking at sort of how do you assess progress since the first VNR. One of the key things to look at is really providing an update on the next steps from your first VNR. You may have had recommendations, conclusions, or ways forward. It might be a good idea to include a chapter on really looking about what you've done since that first VNR and ticking off or highlighting some of those next steps, which ones were implemented and which ones are maybe still on hold. I also think the implementation challenges and how to really assess what were the blockages behind some of the challenges, but what were some of the driving forces behind some of the successes. And we really want to see much more deeper analysis there. So getting to the next point about comprehensive reporting. Sometimes the first VNRs were really a baseline, just sort of saying this is where we are right now, and this is the data that we have. But 3 years on, you have a lot more data, and there's a lot more scope and a lot more help available to help you analyse that data. So everyone wanted to have more disaggregated data after their first review, but many countries have got that data now. So the question is, what do you do with that data? How can you analyse it and include that data and graphs in your review and on a dashboard, if you're going to do a dashboard, maybe this time around. Looking at the next slide, I've got a few more slides left. One of the key things I've mentioned is just
to warn you, we have a couple of minutes more.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. Just to let you know, one of the key things we would encourage countries to do right now would be to reflect on their institutional mechanisms. Many countries it was when the first time around developing their review, they were still thinking about which institutions to involve, which ministry should take the lead. Some countries set up a big SDG monitoring body who led on the VNR, and some countries developed a VNR task team. And what we'd encourage you to do, if we go to the next slide, is to really think about the coordination role of that monitoring unit or the VNR team, the communication role, the consultation role, and the data compilation role. It's really important to think through all these aspects of your VNR team and maybe the planning unit that was leading the VNR or your new SDG monitoring unit, because this is a great opportunity to get this going now and not to sort of wait until the VNR's process is up and running next year to realise that you might need to be tweaking some of these aspects. So there's a lot more on that also in the presentation and the guidance tool. Just to go to the final slide now. The stakeholder engagement. There were lots of key challenges that came up. And this is just to get your interest into what maybe some of the responses might be. But some of the key challenges that came up with stakeholder engagement were managing civil society expectations or civil society being a bit critical. How to organise comprehensive stakeholder engagement when you really have limited time. How to engage more at subnational level and marginalised groups. Many countries felt they didn't do enough. How to translate the report so different groups who read different languages or their local languages have access to the report, and how to include that in the timeline. And how to balance formal and informal engagement with government, political advisors, key ministries, technical advisors. It all comes in the mix. There's a lot on that in the guidance tool to help you address some of those challenges that many of you faced. So last slide here, and I'll leave it on this last slide. There are lots of key tips in the guidance tool, but key starting early, thinking about the planning process right now and looking at the stakeholder engagement and developing a key stakeholder engagement and communication plan and trying to get some tips from stakeholders about what they think about stakeholder engagement last time around. Building relationships with the National Statistics Office now and try to get data officials involved in your VNR team. Reflecting on your institutional setup and even starting to think right now about what's going to happen after your VNR is presented and thinking and planning for some of those post-VNR events right now. So that was a lot of information. I hope you'll have a look at the e-tutorial and the guidance tool when it comes out shortly. And I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. If we can stay 1 second on this last slide, just to fix a message, right? Tips to be taken from the first VNR. This 2-hour session today has really a big objective, which is the one of exchanging views, ideas, and best practices. So these are only a few that the Secretariat and Kathleen have been sharing with us. But we will go back to these, and I hope we will be able to go back to this through the presentation of our other speakers. Kathleen, please stay with us, because I do have a question that I will ask you later, and I'm also sure lots of our participants will have a question for you. Let me now move to the first of our panelists from member countries. And I'm very happy to see, I've been seeing her connected, Ms. Fariza Abdullah, which is the Senior Economic Officer of the Office of the Permanent Secretary Economy, Ministry of Finance Economy of Brunei Darussalam. Fariza, we have been interacting a lot in the past year. We had with you in the very first steps of UVNR. Do you find the steps in terms of planning, in terms of engagement described by Kathleen applicable to your experience? I'm sure you will be discussing this in your presentation, but let us know how was your presentation this year for your first VNR presentation and the high-level political forum. Fariza, you have 5 minutes. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Ricardo. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the UN ESCAP for giving us the opportunity to share our experience for the VNR this year. As you've mentioned, we did our first voluntary national review this year, in which we were given the chance to do it in such a unique manner in which the HLPF was done online in an unprecedented manner. But before I answer your question, can I just go through my slides first? If your site could move on to the next slide. This summarizes our VNR process beginning from when we registered to present for the 2020 HLPF by early 2019. During this time, our initial preparation was to review all the HLPFs up to 2018, in which we read through all the VNR reports by all the other member states, including all the guides produced by the UN for countries keen to do the HLPF. In preparation for the VNR, we established a ministerial level steering committee co-chaired by the Minister at the Prime Minister's Office and Second Minister of Finance and Economy, and the Second Minister for Foreign Affairs. In this regard, a working committee was also established, in which this committee was directly responsible for the drafting and editing of the overall report. In this committee, we did include representatives from the National Statistics Office. We conducted direct engagement on drafting the VNR report with the ministries and agencies by the third quarter of 2019 October, in which we socialized to them on the VNRs, the expected output and outcome, and so on. And then together with UNSCEP, in which you also attended, we organized the national workshop for the VNR preparation as well as the overall SDG implementation in January of this year, 2020. That same month, we finished the drafting of the first VNR report, in which it covered all 17 SDGs. However, despite this, with this first draft, we continued to have engagement with the other ministries and agencies. COVID was first confirmed in Brunei in the first week of March, and with it, all our planned engagements with the other stakeholders were shifted online. So we conducted online consultations and discussions with NGOs based on clusters. Because of COVID-19, there was a lot of uncertainty moving towards the HLPF mostly in terms of the logistic arrangements. We do wish to congratulate the UN, including UNDESA and UNSCEP, in your successful efforts to ensuring the HLPF proceeded as planned despite these uncertainties. Due to these efforts, we were able to present our ministerial statement via a pre-recorded video in July of this year. Next slide, please. Similar to other member states, one of the challenges that we identified during the VNR process was that of the data required to support the implementation of the SDGs in Brunei. During the recent World Statistics Day on 20th October, we recognized the need for accurate, timely, and reliable data for planning, whether that be by the government, private sector, or general public. On that day, the formation of a National Data Coordination Committee was announced. This new committee aims to ensure an effective data coordination mechanism at the national level through a whole-of-nation approach that's also result-oriented. So this committee will seek to close the data gaps for the socioeconomic development of the country, including the data required to measure our achievement of the national vision, Wawasan Brunei 2035, and the SDGs. We also recognize the need for the implementation of the SDGs to complement our progress towards achieving our national vision, Wawasan Brunei 2035. With that in mind, the National Coordination Committee for the SDGs in Brunei Darussalam, which monitors the implementation of the SDGs in the country, is now chaired by the Prime Minister's Office, with the secretariat to this committee now the Office of Wawasan Brunei 2035. So hopefully this will give us a chance to strengthen this complementarity. Finally, we continue to increase recognition and awareness of the SDGs in the country by participating in talks and events throughout. One very recent example is the Teens in AI initiative, whereby teens in the country were encouraged to use AI and technology in deriving solutions for the SDGs. This is of the partnership between the government and private sector that's critical for achieving the SDGs. With that, I would end my presentation. And then to answer your previous question, Ricardo, regarding the points raised by Caitlin in terms of preparing for the VNR, one true tip that that was given to us before in our preparation for the 2020 HLPF was definitely in terms of time management, in terms of planning the process to make sure we had enough time for each part of the process, basically getting approval for the first draft and the final draft, and then making sure that was all in place before the HLPF. Thank you.
So many thanks, Fariza. It's always nice to see you and hear from you on this great journey you had. So, if you remember last year, you were here for the sub-regional event, and the few countries in the panel were somehow providing you tips and suggestions. The next speaker is from Myanmar. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, so give not to me but to Myanmar another personal tips besides this one of the time management. So you see, Myanmar is engaging in the preparation of the first VNR. Share another experience that you think will be really useful for them in engaging in this journey very quickly.
I'm not sure how relevant this is for other countries. It depends on the system in which you choose to produce the VNR report. But for Brunei Darussalam's case, we produced it ourselves without any help from the parties in terms of production of the report itself. So I think one very good thing to have in place is that you need a few good writers and editors. This is very micro, but I mean, in terms of preparing the report, you need to make sure you have enough people who are very good at writing, editing, and making sure that the message you're trying to convey is conveyed clearly in the limited amount of space that you have for your VNR report, because if it's too long, it's going to be another shelf on the book, right? So in that case, that was, I think, one of our personal experiences throughout in producing the report.
Thank you so much. That's a great tip. Let's see if our next presenter, Ms. Tanda Kine, Deputy Director of Planning Department, Ministry of Planning, Finance and Industry of Myanmar, how is Myanmar embarking in this journey? Ms. Tanda, can you tell us how this is happening in Myanmar these days? Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ricardo. Yeah, it is my great privilege to be part of this session, and thank you for giving me this chance. And before going to the presentation, please, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Before going to my presentation, let me take an opportunity to share about the Myanmar Sustainable Development Goal, MSDB, 2018 to 2030, which is a long-term development visions, and it is the policy framework for the government. It is really harmonized by the Sustainable Development Goal, as well as the regional and other global commitments. And the MSDB has 3 pillars, and 28 strategy and 251 action plans. And to monitor the progress of the MSDB, we have also formulate the national indicator framework. It has been produced the over 200 indicators that surely supports to the SDG achievement. It is also we have the focal persons to engage and collect the SDG indicators for the administrative sources and survey and case study also. Therefore, it is ensured that we pay the great effort to achieving the goals set forth in both the MSDB and the SDG. Next slide, please. Thank you. In preparation of the VNR report, we are now planning to form the VNR Coordinating Committee, chaired by the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Planning, Finance and Industry, and also the members from the high-level official from the relevant ministry and also agency. And we have organized the strategic coordination group that is jointly chaired by the government agency and UN country teams and also development partners. To accomplish the report within the time frame, stakeholder engagement is playing the key role. And next slide, please. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, for the update, the Vienna update information, currently Ministry of Planning, Finance and the Industry is taking it as a focus ministry for Vienna preparation. As mentioned, in terms of the national level, we are planning to form a coordinating committee, and the working level coordinations have been making a lot of progress through the number of technical dialogues regarding the data availability and the guideline of the VNR. Since we are making the effort to strengthen our national statistical system, we have developed the national strategy for the development of statistics and STS. The existing mechanisms like the strategic coordination group, 10 cluster for the implementation of the NSTS, we are providing the data input for the VNR. For challenges, we had been concerned about the affected stakeholder engagement because due to the current the COVID-19 pandemic, we also have some issue, the data harmonization and from the different survey and the sources, and also these financial requirements to produce the quality report. Finally, we would like to express our sincere thanks and appreciation for your continued support and the contribution in preparation of the Myanmar Vienna report. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Ms. Tanda, for your presentation. We know, especially in these times of the stress with the COVID-19 is very challenging, the hand behavior. But as I said before, we are all here. All your fellow government representatives are here to help you and to provide tips and suggestions, advice to help you on the challenges, I think, that properly identified on the data harmonization, the engagement of different stakeholders in these moments, periods of lockdown, and the financing part. Thank you so much. Stay with us and please feel free to intervene if you have any questions for our following speakers. We now move into a series of countries which already went one step further ahead because they are coming back to present their second VNR and at the high-level political forum in 2021. And the first one is Lao PDR. We have Mr. Maitong Tambabongsa, who is the Director General, Department of International Organization, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Maitong, thank you for being with us and for introducing a little bit your plans and programs for the preparation of the VNR. Floor is yours, and please feel free also to provide your personal advice to, in this case, Myanmar, which is going to present the VNR, prepare and present the VNR for the first time. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Ricardo. I also would like to thank Catherine Porter for the very informative and guiding presentation for the preparation of VNR. For Lao PDR, as you know, we already submitted our first VNR in 2018, and we plan to submit our second VNR next year for 2021. For your information, our first VNR is more on informative and descriptive report on what we have done in terms of the implementation of the SDGs, specifically on the establishment of National Steering Committee, setting up National SDG Secretariat, and integration of SDGs into our 8 to 5 years social economic development plan for 2016-2020. In terms of the preparation for the upcoming second VNR, we have decided that this report will be more on trend analysis that will track the progress on the implementation of SDGs. And drawing from our previous experience, the government has identified and implemented the following steps for preparation of the second VNR. First, inform and engage with the National SDG Coordination Mechanism, namely the National Steering Committee, the SDG Point of Line Ministries, and the SDG Secretariat. By utilizing this already well-established mechanism, it has allowed us to have early informed and prepare of the relevant stakeholders to actively participate in the VNR process. Importantly, collaboration with other relevant government ministries, agencies, and relevant stakeholders is needed in order to provide information and data. In the interest of country ownership, the drafting process will be led by the government in all respects, with engagement from other stakeholders from the very beginning of the process. Second, discuss and plan the scope of the VNRs at the early stage, including the draft outline and information gathering. This will provide a clear direction for all focal points and relevant stakeholders about the priorities, focus areas, and implementing relevant activities that will support the preparation of VNR within the set frameworks. In terms of the content, as I mentioned earlier, LAPIDA will take a step forward, moving from descriptive analysis to more trend analysis. We will include information on progress and the status of all 18 SDGs and more in-depth analysis of the few selected goals and targets seen as national priorities and their related gaps and challenges may also be reflected in the VNR. Third, develop a stakeholder engagement plan using the established SDG network. In the world of the principle of leaving no one behind, we encourage the inclusiveness and participatory of the relevant stakeholders in the societies. And in this regard, we have already engaged with the NGO, CSO, private sector, and development partners for the VNR. Fourth, mobilize and identify resources that would help and support plan activities. This includes the organization of stakeholder consultation and meetings, production of the review, such as editing, layout, translation, and preparation of material, including videos for the VNR presentation at the HLPF, as well as human and technical resources. Fifth, data collection will be drawn from the existing national platforms, namely the National Statistic Bureau and the National SDG focal points. This is to ensure the access to high quality, up-to-date, and disaggregated data for the VNR process. And the initial data collection process has already been completed. Lastly, set enough time allocation and a clear timeline for technical editing, as well as for high-level review of the VNR and its main measures. This should allow for the integration of contribution from within government and other stakeholders, and the preparation of all other relevant material to be used for the presentation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, these are the preview of our preparation that I would like to share with you today. With the emergence of the COVID-19 crisis, VNR preparation will be even more challenging task. Therefore, as we are navigating through this new normal, we need more than ever to strengthen the multilateral cooperation and partnership in all levels in addressing the common challenges and finding solutions toward achieving the goals and targets of the 2030 agenda. In conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to all development partners and international organizations for the continued support extended to the LAPIDA, which allows us to be able to tackle a number of challenges in our national development efforts, as well as the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And we look forward to work closely with you in the near future. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And if you have any question for Kathleen on different ways or approaches to prepare the second time VNR, please feel free to directly address her in the chat box or to her. Before I let you go, a little curiosity. In your presentation, you mentioned 18 SDGs for Lao PDR. This is something that not all the participants might know. Can you just specify and clarify how Lao PDR has been nationalizing the SDGs and why you were mentioning 18?
One of the most challenges of Lao PDR is UXO. UXO is unexploded ordnance. And because of the immense impact of UXO in Lao PDR, we adopted a localized SDG 18 life safe from UXO. It is an additional a localized SDG. So it is 18 instead of 17 as other countries or international goals for SDG. So it has been adopted in 2016 during the visit of the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and our Prime Minister that will be launching in Lao PDR, that is the national SDG 18. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. This was really useful. Let me move now to our host country, Thailand. We have Miss Kataleya Patmoros, Kun Kataleya, who is the Director of the Development Affairs Division, Department of International Organization of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Kun Kataleya, we have been discussing a lot. We discussed your second VNR, your plans for the second VNR, and I actually know that Thailand is gonna present at the high-level political forum officially its second VNR. This doesn't mean that Thailand hasn't produced a VNR or a second or a third VNR in the past years, right? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Yes, you're correct. Yes, actually for Thailand, we have been conducting our own VNR annually since 2017 on different themes. So we had themes such as localization of the SDGs. We have theme on the local community empowerment, and this year's VNR is on volunteerism. So we see the process of preparing our annual VNR as a way to keep momentum on the importance of SDGs implementation for all agencies and all other relevant stakeholders as well. So at the beginning, I would like to thank SCAP for organizing this very important forum. It's my first time to be participating in this event, so I'm very excited. On the VNR process, and also to thank Caitlin for the very useful presentation. I think for our VNR process, we have.
I'm so sorry, Kun Kataleya. We have some connection problem. The audio doesn't come very clear.
Yes.
Is there anything that...
Can you hear me, Ricardo?
You want to try to close the video and stay in audio to see if...
Thank you. Is that better?
Can you try to speak a little bit more?
Yes, so our VNR process, I think we have to look at it from against two very important factors. Is the voice okay now?
Sorry again. They are advising maybe to change the microphone.
Okay. Just a moment, please.
Yeah.
Or perhaps to save time, would you like to come back to me later?
Okay. I'll come back after the next speaker. Sorry for that. Let me then move now to Malaysia. Ms. Afiza Idris, who is the Deputy Director of Environment and Natural Resources Economic Division of the Prime Minister Department. Ms. Afiza, again, Malaysia presenting in Vienna for the second time. What are your plans? Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Masiano. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'll be sharing with you on the implementation of SDG in Malaysia and relates this to the VNR process. Next slide, please. Do you do this?
Where's the slide?
Can I have this?
Control the slide?
Are we supposed to control the slide?
No, they suppose.
No?
You should be able to control it. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Masiano.
Yeah, you should be able to control it.
Can we control it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You can go on slide presentation. Yeah.
Tak dia yang control, dia orang yang pegang ni dia punya screen semua.
You can control? Okay.
No, I can't control it because. Okay.
We'll try with our stuff.
Kita dah buka dia punya slide.
Okay, we'll do it. We'll try to do it from here. You can just ask to go next.
Okay.
Please.
All right. As I said earlier, I'm going to share with you the implementation of SDG in Malaysia and relate this to the VNR process. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. As you see in the slide, the concept of holistic and inclusive development is not new in Malaysia. Sustainable development has been at the heart of Malaysia's development approach since the 1970s, with an emphasis on eradicating poverty, improving the well-being of the people, providing universal access to education, caring for the environment. Therefore, it is seamlessly easier to embed SDG into our national development. And even now, the SDGs are also aligned with the current Shared Prosperity Vision, SPV 2030, as announced in 2019. Next slide, please. This slide is just to show you that that our development plans are actually are aligned to the SDGs. The current 5-year development plan, the 11th Malaysia Plan, formulated with people as a centerpiece of development efforts in many aspects, mirrors the multidimensional nature of SDGs, and it will serve as an overarching and guiding policy for sustainable development in this country. So, implementing the 2030 agenda, the SDGs are already integrated in our national outcomes and national development plan. Next slide, please. And this comes into the exercise of mapping the SDGs to the strategies and the initiatives in the plan. So the mapping exercise has begun in the 11th plan, which started in 2016, and then it continues in the midterm review in 2018. And the upcoming 12th Malaysia Plan as well, we are actually mapping our initiatives and strategies to the SDGs. Next, please. Next slide. And the thing about SDG implementation in Malaysia is that there is a strong commitment from the top level of government. And we have, in order to oversee the implementation, monitoring and reporting of SDGs, we have established a governance structure comprising all stakeholders and headed by the National SDG Council, chaired by the Prime Minister. and the council is supported by a steering committee and chaired by our Director General of the Economic Planning Unit, and which will coordinate as well as oversee the implementation. So next slide. Right. Next slide.
Next slide.
So you're right. This is not VNR 2021 is not Malaysia's first time. We have presented VNR 2017 in July, and the thing about the VNR process is that because the theme is different every year, so the process of developing the VNR goes to different divisions in the economic planning unit. So anyway, for this year, VNR 2021, next slide. Next slide. The theme is sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and our division has been tasked to develop the VNR. We have to say that we have only started to be in this development process in developing the VNR, but we have because we are also doing the 12th Malaysia Plan, and SDGs are embedded in our National Development Plan. So it's not, to us, it's not that difficult to actually come out with VNR 2021. We do admit that the COVID-19 pandemic limits our ability to have a wider engagement with our stakeholders, but because we are also in the process of preparing our 12th Malaysia Plan, we are using, we could use the interagency planning group mechanism to actually gather information and data. And at the same time, a lot of other things, other initiatives have also been going on. For example, our National Statistical Office have already embark on data collection and information pertaining to SDG indicators ever since 2017. And they are actually, they will be announcing it, isn't it? Next month. So a report on the SDG indicators will be out next month. So all these things will actually help us in coming out with VNR 2021. So the difference that we could see from VNR 2017 and VNR 2021 is that in VNR 2017, the focus of reporting was mainly on the government initiatives. But for VNR 2021, our focus will be on the private initiatives, on CSOs as well as NGOs, on the initiatives that they have undertaken so far. So we'll be reporting more of that in the coming VNR 2021. And of course, the whole of nation approach is something that we will follow through with VNR 2021. Next slide is just basically, next slide please, is basically just our preparation timeline that we hope to go by. So that's my presentation for this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Idris. Very interesting presentation. I'm very glad to see that the focus will be on private initiatives, engagement of the different stakeholders, but in particular the illustration and sharing of the different examples of implementation is key. And thank you so much for bringing it on board. Also very important to mention now the two processes, the DNR preparation and the national planning are integrated, and the commitment at the top level. Absolutely very important. And I think that, again, in the spirit of support to our first time presenter, Myanmar, these are tips and that might be taken on board. Let me try now, go back. Kunkatleya, can we try again with the connection to see if it is a bit better now?
Hi, Ricardo. Can you hear me better?
Yes, better. Please go ahead.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Ricardo. So I'm sorry for that. And just to say thank you to SCAP for organizing this very important forum and for Caitlin's presentation earlier, which was very informative as well. And it's my first time to attend the forum, so I'm very excited. Just to begin by answering your question, Ricardo. Yes, for Thailand, since 2017, we have been preparing annual VNRs on different themes. We had one on SDG localization, we had one on community empowerment, and this year's VNR is on volunteerism and SDGs. So we see the process as being useful as to keep the momentum on SDGs implementation, as well as to raise awareness of the importance of SDGs implementation among all different government sectors and also other stakeholders as well. In terms of the VNR process for next year, as you know, next year would be our second formal VNR presentation. We made our first presentation in 2017, and next year would be our second in 2021. And then I think we have to look at our preparation process two very important factors. The first one is that we are well into the decade of action. We have 9 and just a little bit, 9 and less than half a year left for the implementation of the SDGs before we reach the time frame of 2030. And also we are in the midst of the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, which definitely will affect our implementation of the SDGs. In terms of our VNR preparation process, we are definitely beginning our process. We are working backwards to plan our timetable. As everyone has stressed, time is of the essence, and we realized this, and we are making our best efforts to try to make the best use of our time. In terms of what has changed in our preparation since our first submission in 2017, the first element is the institutional arrangements. In 2017, we did have the National Committee on Sustainable Development with 3 subcommittees. Since then, we have included one more subcommittee. The first 3 subcommittees are on the SDG implementation, advancement of SDG implementation, on monitoring and evaluation, and also on sufficiency economy philosophy, which is Thailand's homegrown approach to a sustainable development. Since then, we have added one more subcommittee on strategic environmental assessment. And the reason behind this is that we would like to make sure that our arrangements encompass all 3 dimensions of sustainable development: social, economic, and also environment. We had a revamp of our national committee the end of last year. So we have a new committee on sustainable development. It is led by the Prime Minister himself. At this point, all 169 targets have been allocated government focal points. So we all have responsibilities to move forward with all the different targets and goals. We have 4 subcommittees, as I have mentioned, and there's a possibility that we could be proposing new subcommittees if there is a need. And this time around, we have new elements to introduce to the process and the presentation. We have in place our SDGs roadmap, which will guide our way forward in our SDG implementation from now on. And the roadmap comprises of 6 elements. The first is policy integration and coherence. The second is enabling mechanisms. The third is partnerships. 4th is pilot projects. 5 is monitoring and evaluation. And 6 is awareness raising. And And in addition, we also are working on our SDG +5 report, which will cover the years from 2016 to 2020. And this report, which is near completion, will help to inform our next VNR, definitely for next year. But more importantly, I think it will also provide us with a clearer picture of where we stand in terms of SDG implementation. So we would clearly see the progress that have been made, but more importantly, the remaining challenges. In terms of our 2021 VNR, what will we be focusing on? I think there will be two main elements. The first one would be that to ensure that our next year's VNR, is more data-driven. We have now an electronic database, which is called EMENS, the Electronic Monitoring and Evaluation System of National Strategy and Country Reform. And this would gather information on the implementation of our national strategy, as well as the SDGs, because the SDGs have been integrated into our national strategy already. So we would have data from that system, the EMENS, but also from all the different implementing agencies and all the different stakeholders as well. And the second element that we will be focusing on would be to be more inclusive. So we are working out ways to try to provide a forum for the different stakeholders to express their views and to contribute to our VNR for next year. But since with COVID, I think we are still working on the modalities for that and see how best we can gather the views of the different stakeholders. And we are here to learn from other countries and from ESCAP as well on how best to do this. And I think we are concentrating more on the process itself. Of course, the presentation next year is very important, but the process is equally important, if not more. And we hope that the process would help in terms of engaging all the different stakeholders, thereby making it even clearer that SDG implementation is not about government only. It's actually all different stakeholders in the society has a role to play in terms of SDG implementation. And the second element that we hope to get out of the VNR preparatory process is the awareness raising element. We hope that the prep process would also help to raise awareness about SDGs among the Thai public and the different stakeholders. So with that, I will end my presentation. But of course, our VNR next year, we will also definitely concentrate on the impacts of the COVID-19 on SDG implementation in Thailand. I think that would be an important element for our next year's VNR. So with that, thank you very much, Ricardo.
Thank you, Kunkatleya. Very rich, so many information. I'm very glad to see that there is the focus on voluntarism and SDGs. The fact that this second time VNR will be extremely data-driven and more inclusive. These are very, very connected to our presentation from Kathleen earlier on. And I'm glad to see that everybody is on the right track in terms of having very clear how a second time VNR can be different from the first one. But we have a country here, our next speaker, that went even further, because the Republic of Indonesia is going to present next year at the High-Level Political Forum its third VNR. Mr. Satru Bramono Brotidingrat from the Directorate of Economic Development and Environmental Affairs of the Director General of Multilateral Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Bram, we talk a lot this year. We were very glad to see that Indonesia is ready for its third VNR. It's a first in the region, pioneering as like it happens frequently. Tell us a little bit more. What drove your intention to present for a third time, and how are you putting things together so that the country can be presenting for a third time next year? Over to you.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you to you and ESCAP for inviting us to speak. Ricardo, you have so much confidence in Indonesia, but doing this for the third time doesn't mean that we are more confident. Actually, we're becoming more nervous. But in any case, I'd like to thank all our previous speakers as well. Much of what they said actually is our own experience. So thank you for that. If I'd like to just briefly mention that Indonesia has presented indeed its VNR twice before in 2017 and 2019. In our second VNR, we were able to compile data and to present some progress in our SDG implementation, namely institutionalization and integration of SDGs into national and provincial development planning, progress in poverty alleviation, job creation, education access, reduction of greenhouse gases, and disaster risk. In our third VNR, we have yet to begin our multi-stakeholder consultation and discussions, but we might explore some findings out of our second VNR and our first VNR, namely, and I think Thailand mentioned this before, it is very important to examine the effect of the pandemic and economic slowdown in SDG implementation. One thing that we are particularly looking towards, based on our past experience in our first and second VNR, is the importance of interlinkages between goals and targets. And thirdly, we might look at job creation through structural, economic, and regulatory reforms. And this is in the framework of the recovery from the pandemic. So in this respect, Indonesia places, again, a strong, and I want to emphasize this enough, the importance of the multi-stakeholder approach. Indonesia is a big country, but for SDGs, we're always keen to get everyone on board in our consultations and in our planning. The current pandemic will surely affect this process, but our multi-stakeholder approach has been growing in recent years. And I'd like to mention one particular stakeholder that's becoming even more and more important. In particular, the role of SDG auditing and evaluation is becoming more prominent. Other than civil society, academia, and the media who monitors and evaluates our SDG performance, our Supreme Audit Institution has also aligned SDGs into development auditing, therefore producing more robust monitoring and evaluations, particularly on the performance of the state budget on SDG implementation. So in a way, it's an evolution of our SDG implementation. We thought a lot on the planning and execution, but now we're also looking very closely at the monitoring and evaluation because it's very important in terms of gauging how well we are doing and also in trying to plan out our future. So these might be, and I want to emphasize might be because there are, of course, there has to be multi-stakeholder and a comprehensive consultation among all the parties involved. But these might be some of the issues that we'll be looking at in our third VNR. And we look to UN ESCAP to provide its always valuable input and support to our third VNR. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you so much, Bram. With Bram, we have been discussing a lot this year, and I'm really glad to see that there's someone who knows a lot, who has been one of our partners for a long time now, and can really provide us of very good insight about the whole process. Let me now thank you for to all our panelists. Please be with us because I already saw in the chat there are lots of questions coming up. I would like now to move to our two discussants coming from the United Nations system that will help us reflecting a little bit on these VNR experiences. And I would like to start now with Mr. Kamal Malhotra, who is the United Nations Resident Coordinators in Vietnam. Vietnam is not a country which will be presenting a VNR next year, but present the one in the past. And I would like to get Mr. Kamal Malhotra's insight about not only the VNR process in the country, but also how the UN system is supporting or has supported this, and in general the implementation of the 2030 agenda in the country, of course, plus some reflection on the panelists that already spoke. Kamal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Am I clear? Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you and we can see you very clearly. Please, over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon to all the panelists. Thank you for inviting me as a discussant. Vietnam presented its VNR, its first VNR in 2018, and we as the UN country team and I as resident coordinator helped them develop their VNR over a period of about 11 months from September 2017 to the middle of the year of 2018 when this was presented in New York. It was led by the Ministry of Planning and Investment, and it was in the context of one of the most important tasks of the SDG National Action Plan, which had been issued by the Prime Minister in May of 2017. I launched the National Action Plan with the Deputy Prime Minister in early July 2017, and the report that the VNR report covered all the 17 SDGs, even though the emphasis in every VNR is on specific ones. So it did highlight SDG 6, 7, 11, 12, 15, and 17, which was the focus of 2018. But they felt that they wanted to cover all the 17 SDGs. In terms of the UN support, I want to highlight 4 or 5 areas. One is we helped them with the identification of key evidence-based messages and bottlenecks. And I want to stress here that as the UN in Vietnam, we have for many years been operating as a one UN. So this was not led by any particular agency. It was led by the Resident Coordinator's Office and our SDG task force, which got all the agencies participating in it. So it was a one UN approach, and I think that's really important. It is very important not to have different agencies dealing with different ministries or providing different messages. It is important that we have one approach. So we help them identify key evidence-based messages as well as bottlenecks, while we suggested solutions on how specific SDG-related issues could be dealt with or highlighted. We helped them put together a whole of government drafting team. It's very important, I believe, that there be a whole of government approach. And while the Ministry of Planning and Investment was leading, we helped support the government in forming a VNR drafting team, which consisted of representatives from all government ministries and agencies who are in charge of delivering the VSD, the Vietnam SDGs as assigned by the Prime Minister in the National Action Plan. So that was a focus on horizontal coordination. But also these same ministries and agencies were also responsible for what I would call vertical coordination from the local level up. So it was both horizontal and vertical. We helped them with the multi-stakeholder dialogues, particularly to gather voices of grassroots stakeholders as inputs to the VNR development. This was done through, for example, UNDP's consultation with the Hmong ethnic women, the Youth Survey, the ASEAN My World Survey, the Youth SDG Hub, and the Governance and Public Administration Performance Index that UNDP has been championing every year, but also UNICEF's initiatives on Upshift and the U-Report platforms, and UN Women-supported dialogues with women's groups and gender advocates. We also helped them with capacity building. We provided experts who delivered SDG and VNR related inputs for various trainings organized by the Ministry of Planning and Investment and the Vietnam Union of Friendship Organizations to the drafting team, to CSOs, and to other stakeholders. We also cooperated with ESCAP to organize a training on SDG integration and stakeholder engagement to improve these features in the VNR development process. Then a key role was to actually help them prepare for the participation itself. We were deeply engaged in the VNR editing and translation in terms of our support. And we also helped them with the video clip that they prepared. In fact, I was interviewed so I was part of the video clip as the resident coordinator, and I accompanied the delegation to New York and was with them, which they asked for and which they found very useful. So we essentially accompanied them, we helped them with the video clip, we paid for the translation, those kinds of things. So essentially we accompanied them over an 11th-month process as a one UN. There are some major challenges, and of course, lack of data is a major challenge, and this has also led to, them looking at some of the indicators and saying we need to localize the indicators, and we need to see how we can get data for certain localized SDG indicators. Another challenge was, of course, to ensure that the process was as participatory as possible, involving a very wide range of stakeholders. And we have now, subsequent to the actual VNR, there was a follow-up process. I co-chaired, again, with the political leadership, a workshop that fed back the experience from the VNR. And we've been helping them develop the VSDGs, that's the Vietnam SDGs, their targets and monitoring indicators, which are being mainstreamed into national, provincial, and sectoral development plans and their monitoring and evaluation systems to ensure that the VSDG framework is integrated in the national frameworks and assured to be implemented with an allocated budget. We also did a workshop with the National Assembly, the Parliament, because that's where the budget allocation takes place. And we needed them to really be fully on board. So I think it's very important that in addition to engaging with the government or the executive branch, that you engage with the Parliament. And they're a very, very important stakeholder. And budgetary allocations are done there. And so unless parliamentarians are made aware, we did a whole awareness raising workshops with members of parliament, members of the National Assembly. I did a launch of the SDG toolkit with the chair of the National Assembly. We translated that into Vietnamese, and we also involved the International Parliamentary Union, which together with UNDP had come up with the SDG toolkit. So these are some of the examples of how we supported the government, and now we are helping them with their SDG report, which they're preparing for this year, again as a one UN, and we are helping them mainstream the SDGs into the next 10-year socioeconomic development strategy, which comes into effect in 2021, all the way till 2030. And the next socioeconomic development plan for 5 years from 2021 to 2025. So I'll stop there, and I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Kamal. And thank you so much again for raising the issue of engaging different stakeholders that for example, parliaments play a very instrumental role and do want to be engaged. I can tell you that there is this year at the high-level political forum, some countries even had the Speaker of the Parliament presenting the report, just to show you how much different stakeholders are getting a primary role in terms not only of preparation, visibility, but on substance in the VNR. Thank you so much. I'd like to move now to another resident coordinator in Timor-Leste. I know he's not in Timor-Leste now, but Roy Trivedi, you also have been very much associated to ESCAP, to our SDG activities. Timor-Leste was our chair of the forum last year. What are your reflections on the different panelists so far, and also on the support that the UN system provided to Timor-Leste for their VNR last year. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and thank you to ESCAP for giving me this opportunity to be a discussant. I'd like to build on some of the things that Kamal has already raised, and also first to start by congratulating all of the presenters who have presented today. My first reflection on many of the presentations, which I found very, very impressive, is that the VNR process, of course, there's not a linear process of moving towards the SDGs. And I think this was a point that was also made by Caitlin, that as much as the process is about tracking progress towards achievement of the SDGs, we also know the process allows every government, every society to take a step back and look at what needs to be speeded up, what are some of the indicators which perhaps are not moving as quickly, and how do you put more emphasis on those things. So that is one of the first things that I felt when listening to many of the presentations this morning. As you mentioned, Ricardo, in Timor-Leste, the government presented their voluntary national review, the first one, last year. The process was led by the Prime Minister's office with very senior ministerial involvement. There was very good stakeholder involvement from interministerial involvement, but also involvement of civil society across the country. And the UN system also played a very important role in supporting government during that process. The report that was produced and presented at the high-level forum has been embraced by different parts of government this year, have come back to it and referred constantly to where do we need to make further progress on the SDGs. And it has also been picked up by the presidency of Timor-Leste. So the president regularly refers to SDGs and the importance of moving forward and so on. Of course, this year with COVID-19, it has been a difficult year to move forward on many of the plans that the government presented last year at the high-level forum. So some of the plans around further stakeholder consultation, etc., have not been fully realized because it has been difficult to organize meetings and so on. Nevertheless, the COVID-19 pandemic has also presented the government with a very interesting opportunity for really showing interministerial coordination in response to COVID. And this has been really important, I think, part of how the VNR process has also helped the government to shape its COVID-19 response. The second thing for Timor-Leste has been a very strong emphasis on the part of government to make sure that in terms of the COVID response, that the development gains that have been achieved in Timor-Leste are not eroded. So this has been something that the government has really tried to build during its COVID-19 response. A few points also just in terms of the COVID response. One element that the government is very, very charged with is the way in which the impact of COVID on things like equality in the country and particularly issues of domestic violence and gender equality. This is something that the government is very aware of and all stakeholders in the country are very aware of. Second thing is the importance of maintaining stability during a period of huge disruptions, not just in the health sector, but also in terms of socioeconomics. So government has put a lot of emphasis on ensuring that stability is maintained, because without that, many of the gains in terms of SDGs will be eroded. A third thing that I'd like to mention is other things that outside of the main government response, which have also helped in terms of continuation of SDGs. And this year, for example, the government of Timor-Leste became a formal member of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, which has brought together private sector, it has brought together government, but also other stakeholders. So these are very, very important step in Timor-Leste. Let me make a few final comments. First is that during this whole process, one of the things that the UN system and the UN country team has done is also developed a new cooperation framework for the next 5 years for Timor-Leste. And this whole process of developing the new Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework for the UN system has also enabled other stakeholders to join that process and to keep reminding ourselves of how we want to build a movement within society towards achievement of the SDGs. So the cooperation framework comes into operation next year, but we've used that process as a UN country team to really push forward and support government in terms of its SDG aspirations and so on. Two final points that I'd like to make is two other processes that are going on in the next year. The first is the least developed country graduation process, which Timor-Leste will also be undertaking and will be part of what will be happening in Timor-Leste. And we need to make sure that that reclassification process also links up with SDGs. A second big process that is also in train next year is the Universal Periodic Review process, which of course focuses on human rights issues, but again, which also has a carryover and a spillover impact on the SDGs. And I think what we as a team need to do as in the UN system is to help governments to manage all of these processes and to make the linkages between these processes and the VNR process. Because all of these things are really about integration of SDGs and understanding the way in which SDGs are all integrated and connected to each other. Let me stop there, Ricardo. I think it's been a really interesting presentation, and I look forward to continuing to support you and the ESCAP team and everybody working on this in Timor-Leste and in our region. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, thank you, Roy. You know, we spoke the other day, and I was mentioning how important it has been, and it is cooperating with you, with Kamal. But the nice thing, I think, and which comes evident from this discussion today, is that now we are in the process of establishing a nice network of policymakers, UN system, stakeholders that can really support each other in the VNR journey. This is really nice to see, and thank to you all to having contributed to build it. Thank you so much, Roy, in particular for raising the issue of the engagement of the stakeholders. We have a few questions that have been raised in the chat, with a specific question asked to in Indonesia, Thailand. Please, Bram, Katleya, if you wanna, I will give you the floor after the next two interventions. But if you also wanna, feel free to respond in the chat to the question. Let me move to Mr. Saron Song, who is the Executive Director of Cooperation Committee of Cambodia. Also, Cambodia, not a VNR country, but I know that the Cooperation Committee has been working a lot and has contributed to the VNR when it was prepared in Cambodia. Mr. Sarong, for your intervention as a reflection again on the VNR process, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ricardo, and also UNESCO for having me as the civil society representative in this very important multi-stakeholder forums. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and panelists, as well as the participants. Actually, this is my first time, and I have very great honors and pleasures to join this very important forums. and I am here representing the Cooperation Committee for Cambodia, and as well as the representative of Asia Development Alliance, which is the civil society platform in the region working towards the realization of Sustainable Development Goal SDGs at both regional, national, and as well as subnational levels. Listen to the presentation of our panelists as well as the discussions from the first session in the morning and also at this sessions. I also would like to congratulate to the governments as well as the all the stakeholders for engaging us in the producing the national voluntary review report on SDGs, and also congratulate for taking concrete measures to successfully prevent and also combat the outbreaks of COVID-19 in ASEAN countries. Actually, you as a government and also UN agency have a lot to be congratulated and as well as to be appreciated by civil society. But because of the time, I also just would like to highlight some key concern as well as lesson learned and recommendation as a food for thought for our forum today. First, I would like to say on our key concern, based on our monitoring reports commissioned by numbers of civil society platforms such as Civicus, Asia Development Alliance, TAPS, FORAS, and many other civil national platforms, we have learned that there are many areas come to our great concern as follows. One, over 2017 to 2020, VNR reports clearly inform us that although some countries adopt SDG, even 18 goals, including Cambodia, Laos, but not all targets and indicators in the original SDG were fully localized in the national SDG framework. And at the same time, when we look at the reports, no VNR reports refer to the closing civic space and also not about tackling the system barrier to achieve the SDG, despite increasing call for action by civil society organizations around the world and also in the region to address the human rights situation in many countries and also to protect human rights defenders and the environmentalists. While the localization process sometimes was not inclusive, citizen engagement such as citizen-led data was not counted well. Second, during the pandemic time has even also worsened the crisis of democracies and good governance, which we civil society consider as the foundation to achieve the whole SDG goals. As we have recognized and noted, many governments adopt measures that deprive people from accessing transparent and accurate information and have developed and employed new or existing restrictive laws. In the middle of the pandemic, attacks to democratic rights across the globe as well as in the region have more than even threatened and worsened. Digital surveillance is being used not only for contact tracing in order to control the disease, but also for controlling and preventing disease. Press freedom is also endangered. Many of our activists, including social media users, activists in almost all Southeast Asia countries have been under oppressions, harassment, and also imprisonment. The geo-economic as well as political competition tensions of powerful countries, including the issues of China Sea, worry individual citizens and also civil society that the SDG could not be successfully delivered by the end of 2030s. Ladies and gentlemen, I also would like to share our experience in engaging the VNR process before. I have 3 points to add here. One is civil society actors are very important and fulfill the gaps by the government to provide essential services, especially spread information about the virus as well as to protect the marginalized groups, providing relief to local communities, and also gathering feedback and input from this community to influence the national review processes of the government. And we are together forging the government to hold more accountable. The second lesson learned we have is that while the global processes around the SDG, including national voluntary review, to date, we have seen unprecedented levels of engagement by civil society and also growing the engagement of civil society and grassroots community still remain significant gaps at the national and grassroots levels. While political will is very much needed to ensure the let no one principle in the realities. The third one, we also, as our lesson learned or experience, the role of the UN is far more important to ensure the inclusive partnership and also multilateralism and participation in SDG processes, where we experienced that many of civil society organizations were able to contribute their inputs with the UN platform, especially the UNDP and also UN resident coordinator or UN country teams. While the role of the technologies is far more important to enable different stakeholders to benefit and also to engage in the SDG processes.
Conclusion.
Yes, and I have 3 points for calling the government of ASEAN and also the UN and the stakeholder in order to accelerate the implementation of SDG, as well as to responding to COVID-19. First, the inclusive partnership and multilateralism, where all stakeholders are freely participate and also contribute in all stakes of the SDG processes. And the stakeholder engagement need further improvement, especially beyond the ad hoc measures. The second, the access to qualities and data and informations. We call for the government should take necessary steps to ensure the systematic data collection processes and especially to listen to the citizen-led data. Third, last but not least, is to leave no one behind is for all must be fully localized at the national level. And we call the government should review, revise, and reform their policies, legal framework to make sure everyone has equally benefits and also participate in the implementation of SDG. We request to include all key stakeholders, especially to enable marginalized groups, people with disability, youth group, as well as media groups to participate in our SDG process. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here with you.
No, thank you, Saron. Thank you so much, especially for raising this issue of leaving no one behind. There is a question. I will go back to our speakers. I want to thank Kamal for your presence. I know you have to go. It was a great intervention. I hope we will be able to interact soon. Thank you so much for being with us. And our last intervention today, before we move into the Q&A, is it was mentioned by Bram before. Dr. Agus Joko Pramono, Vice Chairman of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, a very important key stakeholders playing a key role in the Asian VNR. Please, Dr. Agus, you were here also in the past. How is the Audit Board planning to support once again, representing the stakeholders in the VNR process in Indonesia this year, next year? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I'm happy to meet you again in this event, Ricardo, and more happy to see you in healthy and safe conditions. And I also thank you to NSCAP for giving me the opportunity to give interventions in the perspective of the supreme audit institutions. And in 2016, 16, International Organization of Supreme Audit Institution mentioned that we will have 4 approaches in mitigating the government's report or achievement concerning to the SDGs, which are first is to conduct the audit on the government preparedness on SDGs. The second is to conduct the performance audit on the government's SDGs implementations. And the third is fostering accountability, transparency, and responsibility, which are related to the goal 16. And the fourth, or the last, is being a role model by conducting the Supreme Audit Institution Performance Framework. And in our organization, it is including formulating the sustainability report. We have conducted the audit on preparedness of the government of Republic of Indonesia in 2018. And the report was also used by the government in formulating the 2019 VNR. We have conducted also the audit on implementation in 2019. And information also helped government to formulate the strategy in conducting the SDGs implementation until right now. And for the current situations, the impact of the COVID-19 are large and extensive. This impact will also challenge achieving the sustainable development goals globally, regionally, and also nationally. And also Indonesians' SDGs programs today towards achieving to 2030 goals has not been undone by the COVID-19 emergency. Though we have to recognize that all sustainability policies contain responsiveness in their course. It is important for us to consider what steps have been taken in voluntary national review process to identify existing and emerging critical gaps and estimate additional financial resources that are needed to implement the 2030 agenda in our country. This current test of global resilience in COVID-19 crisis is an opportunity for us to evaluate the progress each country has made in sustainable delivery of the essential of food, health, sanitation, education, energy, social harmony, and environmental protections. Sustainability is not just when times are good, but when we are confronted with challenge, even severe challenges, especially in terms of maintaining or expanding social protections to boost well-being and human capabilities confronting this condition. In our 2019 second semester audit report summary, the Audit Board of Republic Indonesia reported several problems of inadequate verification and validation of the subnational level for producing effective quality input data for the distribution of social assistance. The situation has led to less effective social assistance programs as the Ministry of Social Affairs use such input data as the basis of the social assistance distributions. Indonesia's budgets and program realignment process in achieving the national agreed target has a connection with the 2030 SDGs agenda. To make such target achievement, the country will need to fill a financial gap in funding government program, in which public debt is one of the options. It is vital to keep outstanding public debt on the path that sustainability reinforced by the check and balance function of the Supreme Audit Institutions. In performing the check and balance function, the Audit Board of Republic Indonesia serves to provide assurance on the governments of Indonesians' voluntary national reviews. We expect that this oversight task will increase stakeholders' trust, focus government objective on sustainable services delivery, and also maintaining momentum towards reaching the SDGs. Respected delegates and also ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to highlight the impact of the global COVID-19 pandemic on both people's life and institutional performance demand attention to and reassessing SDGs achievement while preparing readiness for adjusted working and social lives. We all do hope that government are able to balance short-term shock with a long-term sustainable plans and also policy. I hope we all stay safe and healthy. Thank you, Ricardo. I give the floor back to you.
Pak Agus, thank you so much. I mean, you know how much we value your intervention and the support you are providing to the group and to this network. It is really appreciated, and we really hope we will be able even to see you in person very soon. I open now the Q&A session. We have a few questions. Let me first ask a question to Kun Katleya, and then I would like to ask Ella, Antonio, to maybe if you wanna, after this intervention, get in the call and ask your question to Indonesia, because I think it's very it's a bit long. So if you wanna do it, Kun Katleya, there is a question about if you can explain a little bit more on the focus on the voluntarism in the next VNR. If you can just briefly talk about that, please.
So thank you, Ricardo. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yep, thank you. So actually the volunteerism is a theme for our this year's VNR, which is an informal VNR. And we are hoping to finalize that very soon. But basically we are looking at how volunteerism can contribute to SDGs implementation. And this, in terms of volunteerism and SDGs and development, is also part of our strategy within the ECOSOC. We are now, Thailand is the member of the ECOSOC from the year 2020 to 2022. We think that this issue is very important, especially in the context of the decade of action, where we need to accelerate our actions to achieve the SDGs. We feel that one of the very important element in this is to try to expand the stakeholders involved in SDG implementation. And that's why we think that volunteers and volunteer work and volunteerism has a role to play and can contribute to really moving on with the SDG implementation. And this is why we are concentrating on this in our VNR. We are trying to, and actually it's to our surprise, when we first started, we thought whether we could get, examples of volunteer work or to contribute to each one of the SDG goals. But actually, once we have started, we found that we had a lot of examples from, this is only in Thailand, but we have a lot of examples from government recommendations from government agencies, from the private sector, from civil society, on different sectors that are really doing good work, doing good volunteer work in Thailand. So actually we have, examples of volunteer work, which is moving forward each of the SDGs. So we are hoping to launch that, very soon, and to be able to share that with SCAP as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kun Katleya. Ella, do you want to jump in and ask your question to Indonesia?
Yeah, well, I explained it in the chat box, but I'm not really sure whether I caught the information correctly. My understanding is Indonesia is already looking at the interlinkages, not just the individual SDGs. And I find that really very interesting, because we all know that some actions or programs under each of the SDGs might be conflicting with or actually synergizing with others. And I think it's important that individually it's interesting to know whether you're progressing or not, but maybe it's time to also look at how these different SDGs can help each other or synergize with each other or actually negate the impact of the other. So my question is, how is this being done, if I got him correctly on the action being done towards this, and whether an analytical method or tool is being used because of the interest that I have in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ella. Bram, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, this is something that we discovered when we were doing our second VNR. it was interesting that when we were compiling the data and processing it, it seems that there are high or significant correlations between individual targets and goals. In terms of the analytical tool that we will be using, I cannot comment much on that. I think it is our Agency of Statistics and our Ministry of Development Planning who are looking at that. But it's just something that we found to be very interesting. And of course, this pandemic, with all its effects, there is an opportunity here actually from that shock to the system to see how this certain shock resonates in terms of the quantitative data, and see how different targets and goals have been affected. So this is a work in progress. We'd love to share the progress on this in the coming months ahead. But hopefully it's something that we could sort of summarize for all our ESCAP friends in our third year now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very interesting.
Thank you both. This was interesting. So there was a question. There were a couple of questions in the chat box focusing on the role and the contribution of the different stakeholders, civil society, and in the specific, to be sure that the principle of leaving no one behind is respected in the VNR preparation, and on how to engage really the different sectors of the society. Can I have a quick round, starting from really 1 minute from Fariza? How did you make sure that in your report this year, you really could include all these voices for the one left behind? And then we'll move to the next speaker. Over to you.
Hi, Ricardo. Thank you. For our side, it was a bit complicated because, again, as I said, we had to shift everything online. So there was little chance of having in-person more detailed or more personal, I guess, consultations with the NGOs in particular. But I think we made sure to consult with the NGOs that we felt were most in touch with the marginalized groups or those in need in our case. So we were in contact with those NGOs who are already involved heavily in providing assistance, having programs for the needy and so on. So we consulted with them, and I think from that way we were able to get a true input from their side.
Many thanks, Fariza. Lau PDR, Mr. Maitong, in your plans for the second voluntary national reviews, do you have a specific plan, strategy to reach those who are left behind, the first is left behind, or a particular group, indigenous, person with disabilities? Over to you.
Hi, Mr. Ricardo. My name is Mingdalat. Mr. Maitong has the engagement's behalf. Can you hear me clearly?
We can now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Regarding your questions about the stakeholder engagements with those who are actually living so far away in rural area, those vulnerability groups, we actually have plans well, especially with our experience. We have starting our SDG network engagements, especially with CSO, NGO, who actually have to connect to those rural communities and in those vulnerability groups. So we plan to use those kind of SDG network to get connected to them and having them the input and participate in the voluntary nationals process. So we are starting to use those network to getting the data and input as well. So I think this is the way that we are going to look forward for it in our process. I hope this answer your questions.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Let me again going to Malaysia, Ms. Hafiza Idris, and what about your country? Did you already have time to think on how to reach different stakeholders, different sectors of the society to ensure again that the principle of leaving no one behind is respected in following VNR, please?
Thank you, Dr. Mesiano. In Malaysia, we have extensive network with the CSOs. There's a particular CSO called the Malaysia CSO SDG Alliance that will usually consult to get information and as well as data on the ground. At the same time, we have also in 2019 embarked on a project called the Localizing SDG, where we involved the all-party parliamentary group on SDG. They basically go down to the local level and to look at issues pertaining to communities. So basically, there's already in place what do you call organizations that we could actually consult. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it actually does. It's important also to make a specific reference to a project. Roy, how is the UN system and supporting and being sure that the principle is respected and each and every single voice is presented in a country like Timor, but you have a broad experience also in the region. Over.
Thanks, Ricardo. I think one thing is that we have to use every opportunity to engage people who are furthest away, perhaps have the least voice and so on. So I think many of our colleagues today have referred to, processes, making sure they're inclusive and so on. But also I want to remind people about the role of the media and using every single opportunity to reach out to people, get their views and so on. So during the COVID period, one of the things that the UN system globally has done is this socioeconomic impact assessment work, where we're going and asking people's views about what are the impacts of COVID on their own lives, and then using that information, synthesizing it and presenting it back to governments, parliaments and so on. So I think there's a long way to go on this. We have to keep going, but it is something that I think all of us need to stay engaged with and so on, looking not just at individuals and communities, but also businesses, the way in which different groups of businesses, formal, informal sector, have been impacted during this COVID. But there's a long way to go and we need to continue on this. Over.
Thank you, Roy. We are almost reaching the conclusion of this very interesting and intense 2 hours discussion. Let me try to close the circle, going back to Ms. Tanda Kine from Myanmar. So you heard a series of fellow government representatives who have presented this year, who are planning to present for a second time or third time next year. You heard about the UN system, the civil society. Do you have a question for any of the panelists, or is there anything you're still curious to know that you think might support Myanmar in the preparation of the report, or is there any final consideration or reflection you want to share with the group after having heard so many voices? Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ricardo. Actually, I'm very impressed about the Thailand and Indonesia and Malaysia. Because they are going to submit the second VNR report in the coming year. But for Myanmar, we are still in the initial stage, and we are trying to figure out in the process to smoothly finalize the VNR report in collaboration with the UN ESCAP and UNDP, thanks to you. And actually, I would like to emphasize one more thing. Now, even though we are in the initial stage, but we are emphasizing on the whole coordinated approach in order, that is our national strategy framework as I mentioned in my presentation, the MSDB, we have MSDB. So this is, according to the MSDB, we believe that we are going to finalize our VNR report in due course. And also, I'm very impressed about other panelists' presentation, and I have learned a lot of things and a lot of experience from you. Thank you.
Many thanks, many thanks. So again, many thanks to all our speakers, all our intervention and panelists and discussants. Let me just leave you with a few pointers. This is a sub-regional preparatory forum for the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development that will be organized next year in a hybrid mode in Bangkok and online from the 22nd till the 25th of March. You will all be part of it. Please, so pin it down on your agenda. You will be the main actor of the session on the VNR that will happen during the forum. At the same time, you know, these days for countries preparing and presenting a VNR in 2021, there is this global workshop organized by DESA. The Regional Commission will be speaking tomorrow night. We will be there and explaining you again what ESCAP is doing to support you. If you have any question, if you have anything to convey, please do that. The day also back to the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, we will be organizing a regional training workshop again for VNR countries. So we have a series of activities that are meant to support, strengthen, and enrich this amazing network and group of VNR practitioners that we develop. Again, so much thanks for being with us. I leave it back to the Secretary of the Forum, and thank you from my side. Over.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for that excellent moderation. May I also congratulate all the speakers and discussants for that enlightening insights. So what we have heard is that although there are more efforts or challenges to address, it is also heartening to know that we are also expanding the partnerships and joint work with everyone and all the stakeholders. So with that, that concludes our afternoon session, but also concludes our program for today. May I invite everyone to the second day of the forum, which will begin at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We will have 3 sessions, beginning with session 3, understanding the importance of financing in the context of a COVID-19 recovery, followed by session 4, which talks about the progress in the SDGs under review at the next Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, as well as the high-level political forum, which Ricardo has mentioned. And lastly, session 5, the social cultural aspects of a Southeast Asian recovery framework. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, may I thank you all for participating in today, as well as invite you for tomorrow's session in the forum. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.